Hello, welcome back to the Pastor's Study. I'm glad that you're here, and I've been hearing from quite a number of you who are telling me that you're finding these video blogs helpful during this time of social distancing, during the coronavirus challenges that we have in our community, and it's a nice point of contact for you in the church, and I think you're also appreciating from the comments that I'm hearing the content and the approach, and I'm very grateful to know that this is ministering to you and helpful to you in continuing your discipleship in this challenging time. And you seem to really like the format, the conversation, or the reference to St. Patrick's breastplate. Got a lot of good response, as well as the reference to the dangerous journey. And so this morning, it's actually Sunday morning when I'm taping this. This morning I wanted to make reference to a book that I read a number of years ago, to pull a book off of the shelf here in the Pastor's Study, by Eugene Peterson. This is a book called Under the Unpredictable Plant. I have a great deal of admiration for Eugene Peterson. He died recently. He was a pastor at Bel Air, Maryland, for a number of years, 29 years. He founded that church, planted it, grew it, pastored it for 29 years. He was also an author, probably best known for his translation of the Bible, which we know as the Message, although that was what gave him the greatest amount of notoriety and public, some measure of celebrity, and he talks about that. He's talked about his celebrity and the challenge of celebrity in some of his books and in some of his interviews. So he's best known for the Message, but that's not the work or the book that I have found to be the most helpful. He's written a lot for pastors and for pastors in churches and for members of congregations. He wrote a series, a 4-book series on vocational holiness, and for pastors, what he calls the Pastor Series. He's got 2 famous series, the Pastor Series, and he's also got a Conversation Series. And at some point here in the future, I might tell a little bit more of a personal story about Eugene Peterson, having had a chance to meet him. But today I wanted to talk about his book, Under the Unpredictable Plant. The subtitle is An Exploration in Vocational Holiness. And it was written for pastors, but I think there's a lot of application here. The principles that he talks about are applicable to everybody in the church, and particularly applicable in our current historical moment with coronavirus. Under the Unpredictable Plant is a reference to Jonah. Jonah was sitting under the gourd after he had gone finally to Nineveh to preach, and had preached a word of repentance, and they repented. And Jonah's upset about this, ironically enough, and he's under the gourd that had grown up overnight, or grown up quickly, to provide him shade in the heat of the day, and then a worm came and ate the vine, and the plant died. So it was an unpredictable plant. And what Peterson is doing is he's using Jonah and the life of Jonah and the ministry of Jonah as a framework and as a metaphor for pastoral ministry. But there's a lot to be gained in terms of our own personal discipleship as well. And there's a chapter in here entitled "The Belly of the Fish," and I think that's an apt description of what we're experiencing right now in our social distancing and our isolation. We're in the belly of the fish right now. We are separated from each other, separated from our places of work, separated from our extended family, separated from our neighbors. We are in the belly of the fish. And I was thinking about that this week and reminded of some of the lessons that Peterson provides in this chapter. there's a section in the book, the chapter in the belly of the fish, that's titled askesis, and he goes into some depth to describe what askesis is. And I'm going to read this portion for you. He says, in the story of Jonah, askesis is achieved in the belly of the fish. The belly of the fish is a place of confinement, of severe and inescapable limits. So Peterson defines askesis for us. He says that askesis is a place of confinement, of severe and inescapable limits. Askesis has to do with limitations. Now, we don't usually welcome limitations. Limitations are limiting. We don't prefer them. We would rather have options, optionality. We would rather have a lot of variety. We would rather have a lot of possibility. Askesis is a situation in which limits are invoked, in which there are severe limitations. Jonah is in the belly of the fish, and he is experiencing limitations. You and I are experiencing limitations because of the social distancing. But there's something unique and special about askesis. It provides opportunities that aren't always available at other times in our lives. There was an opportunity for growth and for refinement and for development in Jonah. Jonah's in the belly. It's the place of gestation. It's the place where babies grow, in the belly. Jonah is growing in his discipleship by being in the belly, by enduring extreme limitations. And so one of the things I want to share with you is that this social distancing experience that we're having can actually be an opportunity for growth. It's an extreme limitation that provides growth. There's a documentary series that I've enjoyed on Netflix. It's called The Chef's Table. And there's a Michelin star, I think a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Iceland. I can't remember the name of the chef. It's an Icelandic name. But he and some of his other chefs, colleagues in Iceland, they wanted to develop what they were calling the Nordic kitchen, a particular, specific, regional cuisine that was unique to Iceland. And in order to do that, they endured extreme limitations. That is to say, they would only use ingredients that could be sourced from Iceland. And so, for example, they weren't able to get any olive oil. They didn't cook at all with any olive oil. That was a limitation that they placed on themselves. But they found that through that limitation, there was a tremendous amount of creativity, a tremendous amount of depth and development that went into the cuisine and the recipes that they were developing for the Nordic kitchen. So much so that they got worldwide notoriety. A couple restaurants were Michelin star, and what was considered at one time the best restaurant in the world was in Iceland, of all places, because of their limitations. Something else that Peterson writes that I want to read for you is this: askesis is a calculated and deliberate interference with this God lust and this God presumption, this God lust and God presumption that we have as fallen creatures. We want to act like God. We are familiar with the frequently beneficial consequences of involuntary askesis. How many times have we heard, as we have visited a parishioner in the days following a heart attack, "It's the best thing that ever happened to me. I'll never be the same again. It woke me up to the reality of my life, to God, to what's important." Suddenly, instead of mindlessly and compulsively pursuing an abstraction, success or money or happiness, the person is reduced to what is actually there, to the immediately personal, family, geography, body, and begins to live freshly in love and appreciation. The change is a direct consequence of a forced realization of human limits. Pulled out of the fantasy of a God condition and confined to the reality of the human condition, the person is surprised to be living not a diminished life, but a deepened life, not a crippled life, but a zestful life. God intensity begins to replace self-absorption. Mature wisdom begins to supplant self-importance. And so askesis is limitations. Sometimes those limitations are thrust upon us, like the heart attack, like the social distancing. But one of the things that Peterson says is don't wait for the catastrophe. Don't wait for the medical diagnosis. Don't wait to lose your job. Practice askesis, a practice of self-limiting to combat the God complex and to grow in depth in the concrete, in the life that God has given to you. Well, we don't have to wait. The askesis has been put on us. We're in the belly of the fish. And so we have an opportunity to develop certain habits and practices, to look closely at what's right around us, to be extremely local, to be creative in our kitchens. You might not be able to have access to the kinds of ingredients that you would normally have, but it's an opportunity to develop something, to be creative and to produce something with your family, with your devotions, with God. Opportunities to grow in your prayer time, to grow in your reading of God's Word, to use a Bible app or a daily devotional reading to grow because of the limitations that are placed upon us as a result of the coronavirus. One of the things that we can learn from askesis is the word askesis is closely related to the word ascetic. You've heard of asceticism, extreme asceticism of the medieval age, where people were wearing hair shirts and self-flagellating, and they were climbing up stairs on their knees in prayer. It's really kind of awful stuff, and not to be practiced, not to be supported in any way. But that's a misunderstanding of what askesis or asceticism is. Asceticism, in the Greek word, or ascetic, askesis, not only has reference to limits, but it's a reference to a gymnasium. If you're like me, my gym's closed. I started going to a gym a number of years ago. I was 50 pounds heavier about 2 years ago, but changed my diet. Started working out 6 days a week, 30 minutes a day on an elliptical, cardiovascular exercise, dropped 50 pounds. I went to the gym. And that's what an ascetic life is. It's working out. It's limiting my caloric intake. It's limiting my day in certain ways so that I can exercise. Well, I can't go to the gym right now. You probably can't go to the gym right now. We have been limited, and we're not able to go to the gym. But that's not to say that we can't go to a spiritual gym, that we can't embrace the limitations that we're finding ourselves in order to grow and in order to develop ourselves and our spiritual muscles in this time of social distancing. I want to close by sharing with you a prayer that Jonah prayed while he was in the belly of the whale. It's a reference to Jonah chapter 2, verses 2 through 9. Peterson includes it in the book. It's a prayer for the ascetic. It's the prayer for those who are in the belly of the fish. It's a prayer for you and for me.
Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight. Yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head at the roots of the mountains. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you, into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord." And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land.
We will be delivered someday, and hopefully soon, delivered from the coronavirus. But for now, we're in the belly of the fish. And so for now, we have an opportunity. There are limitations. And those limitations are a place for us to grow, for gestation to take place, for development to take place, to grow through the limitations. And so I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you while you're in the belly of the fish. I'm praying that the Lord will use this time of limitations so that you might grow in Him, grow in your knowledge of Him, grow in your love for Him, grow in your confidence in Him. I'm praying for you for that, and I'm looking forward to the time soon, I trust and I hope and I pray, when we will all be together in God's temple, in God's house, here at Beverly Heights Church. God bless you.